So in this property, there's condensation forming on the windows in winter, followed by mould growth behind the sofa. The problem with the sofa is it's trapping the air. Here's the explanation given during the survey.
Explain the reason you're getting it in the corner is because this is external, this is semi-detached property. You've got three things going on. You've got the extra surface area on the outside, so you're losing temperature there. You've got the cupboards or the shelves themselves have poor airflow.
Yeah.
And therefore you get the vapor diffusing like smoke, but you're not getting the heat from the radiators as much. I'm not sure where your radiators are.
It's underfloor heating.
It's underfloor. Well, I like underfloor heating. However, it radiates in a different way to radiators. It doesn't create as much airflow. Radiators, despite their name, are actually produce air currents, and the old-fashioned radiators are really hot, 60 degrees centigrade, that creates this massive airflow. With underfloor heating, the downside of it is that it's not creating much airflow. The upside is that it warms your toes, so it gives you the sense of being warmer than it actually necessarily is.
Okay.
Anyway, the third thing is that once you've got mould growing, then you're going to get an increase of mould. And if you look behind here, we've got mould growing behind the sofa, and it's the same thing. The sofa is reducing the airflow, and it's acting as an insulation, so it's stopping the airflow. At the moment, it's 16.7, which is 3 degrees centigrade, or 3.5 degrees centigrade. You also these blinds are stopping the airflow, and you're getting mould on the windowsill and condensation in winter. But that's an explanation. I bet you've also going to have. I think you've had damp proofing in the past. Do you know whether you've had damp proofing? Looks like it.
No, what's damp proofing?
The wall, the plaster looks like it's been replaced, which is normally a sign of past damp proofing. It increases the risk of mould. It reduces the absorption.
Why would you get something damp proof?
Because typically it's condensation, but it's mistaken as rising damp. So damp proofing treatment is against rising damp.
Right.
So you've got damp zones. You don't necessarily get mould where there's dampness, because, but sometimes you do, and you will tend to get mould downstairs. So sometimes when you've got condensation forming on here, you get damp underneath, but this looks fine. But we are summertime, so I'll have a look downstairs. But this is really good. You want to make sure it's on the masonry level. This is called Doctor Meter. Costs about £25. Comes from China, and it works better, in my opinion, than the standard surveyor's version, which costs about £500-600. So everyone should have one. There are no brown stains on the inside, suggesting that water isn't passing through the exterior render. However, I had a look. There is a crack, and it should be filled, because what can happen is water can penetrate through, causing increased heat loss, making the internal problem worse. But again, the problem is always to do with excess vapor, made worse by heat loss rather than the other way around. The thermal imaging camera can highlight areas of heat loss. So this is a thermal imaging camera, and we're looking at the eaves there.
Yeah.
And this is where the mould is growing. And do you see how much colder it is?
Right.
And even though it's May time, when it's obviously a lot warmer, and it's sometimes difficult to tell the relative temperature difference, but and that's not penetrating damp. If you had penetrating damp, you'd have a brown stain, and you're not getting it. It's simply the heat loss.
Okay.
that's increasing the relative humidity. It's not changing the vapor. Vapor remains the same, but whereas in the center of the room it could be normal levels of relative humidity, say 65%. If there's a 5-degree temperature difference between the center of the room and this area here, it will increase the relative humidity by about 25%.
Yeah.
So go from 65% to 90%, which is within the mould risk zone of 85% relative humidity or more.
Okay.
So every property has a risk of mould to some degree, and if you've got no mould at all, it may mean that you're over-ventilating and you're spending too much money throwing good heated air out of the window. So every property has to manage it, but in this property you've got way too much mould. And
why is that? Is that just
because I think it's primarily ventilation, insufficient ventilation. Even though you've got a dehumidifier, it's a relatively low capacity dehumidifier.
Right.
You're doing all the things that most people nowadays do, but we're in an old property here. I think it's 1920s, 30s. And it wasn't designed for modern living. So people would have a shower once a week.
Right.
They would cook, but the windows were single glazed and rattled, and you got natural ventilation through there. The chimney drew the air out. The fireplace would be used with a fire. And you get this constant ventilation because as you're burning the coal is drawing the air out, so you're getting this constant ventilation. And people only wash their clothes once a week for Sundays, basically.
Right.
So the modern lifestyle is very different, and we have to treat it differently and deal with it. So there are 4 primary causes or solutions to the mould. One is to increase the ventilation or dehumidification such that the dew point internal dew point is dropped below the external temperature. Ideally, it's the same as the outside dew point, and I'll explain that a little bit more later.
Yeah.
You can insulate the property, which is a good thing to do anyway because it reduces your heat loss. Problem with insulation is that it's difficult to identify all the areas of heat loss. For example, the front door, the metal around the windows, you're getting some heat loss from that. If I just look in here, you're getting a lot of mould down here because the metal of these windows, although they're fairly modern, good quality windows. By the way, there's no trickle vent, but that's a small thing. But they create heat loss, and this type of you're getting mould on there as well. This type of shutter or blind reduces the airflow, so you're not getting the heat, but you're getting the heat loss, so you're getting increase in relative humidity. Mould only grows where relative humidity goes above 85% for extended periods.
Curtains
Would be better, but it's not solving the problem. The problem is the excess vapor in the first place. So there are 4 principal solutions. One is ventilation dehumidification. Second one is insulation, but it's difficult to insulate every single part of the property. The third one is increase heat, but that's an expensive way of dealing with the problem, and also you'll continue to have issues in here. And the fourth one is increase airflow. So by not having the shutters open, not having the shutters closed for long periods of time. Thinking about, so mould wants 85% relative humidity over a long period of time of 6-8 plus hours. So if you're constantly keeping, but really the simplest, best and cheapest way is to target the ventilation. So that's target the ventilation for cooking by using the extractor fan whenever cooking. and use tops on pots and pans for whenever cooking. To target ventilation from drying clothes by using a dehumidifier, ideally drying clothes in a room with the door closed that's isolated and maybe even the window open and or dehumidifier and dealing with it, or even better still a dehumidifier, a dryer that uses a dehumidifier. Heat pump dryers are good ones. Heat pump dryer, yeah. If you look up, Which has some good recommendations for that. And then the other one is targeted ventilation for the bathroom. So I'll just have a double check. I think your bathroom. Yeah. So the extractor fan is turned off within a few, maybe 5 minutes. So we'll lengthen that to it should be at least half an hour.
Okay.
And keep the door closed of the bathroom at all times. And then respiration is harder. So trickle vents is a good way, or opening windows.
Can you add trickle vents to windows?
You can retrofit them, but they're never as good as the original. And I in my opinion, I go to a lot of properties that have huge mould problems and trickle vents. So I don't, and often you get the mould around the trickle vents.
Right.
Because it's not dealing with the root cause. It's just a sort of bit of additional background. I would focus on monitoring and targeted ventilation. Those are your primary solutions, but I'll give you some additional tips like moving the sofa out, creating a bit more airflow around the eaves, maybe some targeted insulation as well.
Okay.
So in this property, the primary issue was excess vapour from insufficient ventilation. The kitchen extractor fan works well, but it isn't used very often, and this is an open plan living area. Clothes are dried internally with a dehumidifier, but it's a fairly low capacity dehumidifier. The bathroom extractor fans are not particularly good, but the main issue is the doors are being left open after a shower. So all of the humidity is finding its way to the cold surface, creating high surface relative humidity and not being extracted out. The simplest solution is to use the ventilation more than currently being used and supplement it with a dehumidifier.